Hey guys, welcome back. In the previous video, we set up most of our prep work. We set up and created several characters, our folder structure, all the assets that we will need, most of the assets that we will need for our project. So we've got a lot of our heavy lifting out of the way. Up next, we're going to start working on the game info instance, which will set up our front end and handle the main menu, as well as some of the other settings like launching the lobbies and things like that. So let's go ahead and continue. Let's go ahead and go to the blueprints. All levels, open up the game info instance. Let's go ahead and double click, open that up. And we should have a fresh graph here. So let's go ahead and start working inside of the graph. Let's right click in the graph and let's create a custom event. So custom event. Custom event. Custom event is going to be called show main menu. So show main menu. And what this is going to do is actually show the main menu. So let's right click and say create widget. So create a widget. The widget we are going to be creating is the main menu. So go ahead and select that. Now I didn't connect this up just yet because there's a check that we're going to run, and I'll show you why in a moment. Right click on this return value and promote that to a variable. And call that main menu WB for widget blueprint. Over in the details panel, just for cleanliness, I'm going to give that a category and just call it widgets, like so, just so that I can do this and say get out of here. Reason we did this is what we're going to do now is take our reference that we just created, our variable there, hold control and drag that into the graph. And drag off this now and say is valid. So we want the is valid with the question mark there. And now we can plug this in. And what we are essentially going to do is say, has this widget already been created? If it has, all we're going to do is add it to the viewport. If it hasn't, then we're going to create it. Because what could happen is we can get to our main menu, we create it, and then we go into the options, change some settings, and come back to the main menu. We're not going to want to create the widget again. We're just going to want to tell it to display because it's already been created and stored. So it's just a cleaner way of doing things. So let me make this bigger like so, because we're going to be working in here for the majority of this video. Let's take this variable here, copy and paste it, drag off of it, and say add to viewport. And then connect from the set node there, connect the is valid, plug that in like so. Okay. And it's asking for an owning player here. We can right click and say get player controller. And we can use that. There's a bit of misconception about the player index and how that relates to multiplayer. In a local multiplayer, you'll want to use the player index to define different players. For a internet play, you won't have to worry about the player controller player index because all players are essentially player index 0. So even clients are index 0. So you won't have to worry about this for internet play. It's only really local, like couch co-op games, that you have to use the player index. So with that, let's drag off the return value. What we want to do last is show mouse cursor. So set show mouse cursor. Go and select that. Let's plug that in at the end. And let's make sure that it is checked. So we're showing the mouse cursor at this point. So I'm going to add a comment around this. Select it all and hit C and say show main menu and enable mouse cursor. So it's a good habit to do comments just to remind you what everything does. Totally optional, up to you. Okay, let's go ahead and create another custom event. We're going to do something very similar now for the remainder of our front end options. So let's right click, custom event. This custom event is going to be called show host menu. So from the main menu, player chooses to host a game. We now need to show the host menu. So for this, we'll right click, create a widget, just like we did before. Click drop down. Host menu is what we're going to be showing here. So I can drag off this, get player controller, and let's promote this to a variable, which we'll call the host menu WB. And let's also put that in that widgets category, just so that we can hide it. Let's control drag it in, not rename it, but control drag it in. drag off of it is valid. And just like above, so let's connect this up, connect that. I'm going to copy this, paste it, add to viewport. So now we don't need to show the mouse cursor at this point because we've already done it when we've shown our main menus. This is all we need to do really for this. So I'm going to add a comment around this, and we'll say host game menu. Okay. Up next, let's do the server menu. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to right-click, custom event, add a custom event. This is show server menu. And for this, we will create a widget. Right-click, create widget. It's going to be the server menu. Connect that up. I'm just going to copy this, paste it. For this, we're not going to promote it to a variable because we're going to create this and refresh it each time we call this server menu. So we're just going to create it each time for this. So we can add it directly to viewport here. So I'm just going to say add to viewport. Add a comment around that. Say shows the server menu. I'll say created each time it's called. Okay. Let's go into the options menu now. So we're kind of working our way down the main menu. So let's right click, custom event, show options menu. And let's go ahead and right click, create widget. This drop down, options menu. For this one, we will store that as a variable. So I'm going to right click on this pin here, promote to variable called options menu, WB. Just so it's consistent like the other ones, put it in the widgets. There we go. We'll control and drag that in. Drag off of it is valid. Put that in. A little bit tedious, but we're almost done, and it's a lot cleaner way of doing things. I'm going to copy this, paste that, plug that in, like so. Let's copy our options, paste that, add to viewport. Let's plug that in, plug that in. Okay, let's add a comment around this. Shows the options menu. Okay. Up next, what we need to do is, so we've done, if we scroll up a little bit, we've shown the host menu. The host menu is on screen. The host defines the characteristics of the server that they're going to create. What happens next after they choose to proceed from the host menu? Well, we're going to launch our lobby at that point. So we're going to create a custom event to handle that. So I'm going to right click and say custom event. I'm going to put it next to this host menu as well. So let's call this launch lobby. Now launch lobby is going to have some additional pins on it that are going to come from our host menu. So when the host enters the server name, defines the number of players, whether it's LAN or internet, we're going to have to pass that through. So I'm going to add some inputs here for this. And the first one's going to be an integer. Second one's going to be a Boolean. That's fine. The last one's going to be text. So the first one up here, this is going to be called the number of players. Second one here is going to be enable LAN question mark. Are we doing internet or LAN play? And the last one is going to be server name. So the name of the server that we want to pass through. Okay. What we're going to do now is promote this and this to variables that are replicated. And replicated is, if you've seen some of the videos out there, allows information to be passed from the server replicated. And I hate to use the the name in the definition, but it's the best way to put it, passes the information from the server to the client. A client has its own version of that variable, while the server has the authority over it and has a version as well. So to do this, it's actually very simple. We can right-click on this property or pin here, promote that to a variable. We're going to call that max players. And over in the details panel, let's put this in a category. We'll call this server settings. We don't want to put it in the widgets category, so we'll say server settings, like so. Replication, there's an option right there. Should this variable be replicated over the network? And some of you have probably already experimented with these if you're watching this video series. I'm guessing you have an idea of what replication is. So if not, there's a bunch of how-tos as well explaining this a little bit better. So let's continue. There's replicated, and then there's rep notify. Rep notify is the same as replicated. However, a function will also be created that gets called whenever the variable changes. We're not going to use any rep notifies here. We're just going to use replicated. So I'm going to select replicated. You can see it updates. Let's go ahead and promote this one to a variable as well. And this is going to be server name. It is also going to be in server settings, and it's also going to be replicated. Let's connect that up, like so. Now we don't need to promote enable LAN to a variable. We're just going to leave that as it is. So let's, before we continue with this script here, there's one thing that we're going to need to do. So I'm going to hop up here, somewhere to the right up here. I'm going to create a custom event. This custom event is going to be called show loading screen. And that's all I'm going to do for now, because I need to call that here. We'll come back and do this script a little bit later. But we need to call that now, so we're going to say show loading screen. And at that point, it will create the loading screen, add it to the viewport, etc. We're not going to do that just yet. So after we've shown the loading screen, we're going to use one of our first Blueprint Online session nodes. And that's going to be the create session. So go ahead and create session is what we're looking for. You can plug that in now. Player controller. We can just say get player controller. Get player controller. Public connections is going to come from the server who defined it. So we're going to take our max players here, drag and drop that on top. So whether or not we are using LAN, that's going to get passed directly through. So I'm going to take this and plug that in like so. Now this node is latent, which is indicated by this little clock icon up here. It means it's going to keep trying to do this over and over again. So we're only worried about the success or the failure. If it's a success, what we're going to do is right-click and say Open Level. I'm going to expand this. And the level name that we're going to be opening is the lobby. So we're just going to say Lobby. We do need to make sure that the level that we open is a listen server, so that other clients, or so that the server is listening for clients to connect. Very important that you put that in, otherwise you will not be able to connect. So on success, we're going to open the level. On failure, we're going to need to present a message to the user that they failed to create the session. So for this, what we'll do is we'll create a macro to handle that. We're not going to populate the macro just yet, but we're going to create it so that we can finish off our script inside of the event graph here. So I'm going to hop over to the My Blueprint panel, click the Add Macro button. And this macro is going to be called Display Error Message. And Display Error Message is going to have a couple of pins on it. So we'll have 2 input pins. First is going to be an executable, so EXEC. The second one is going to be a string. And we'll say, for this, we'll say error found. And for this, we'll say error message. So don't worry about the macro itself just yet. We'll come back and do that a little bit later as well. So let's save that. Let's go back to the event graph. We can now call this whenever we fail. So now I'm going to plug this in like so. And now we can enter what the message should be. So we'll say failed to create session. Let's make that caps. Session, please try again. Something like that. Okay, that's all we're going to do for our launch lobby setup there. So let's add a comment around all of this. Hit Z and say launch the lobby. with host settings, something like that. Okay, let's see, what else do we need to do? We need to set up joining. So let's see, shows the server menu. We have the server menu on screen. Now what do we want to do if we actually want to join a server? So right next to that, let's create a custom event. And we'll call this join server. So we'll say add custom event. It's called join server. And this is going to have an input on it. So we're going to need to create an input. This input is going to be of the Blueprint session result. So the Blueprint session result, which is all of our online sessions, so Blueprint session. And let's call this the session to join, like so. Okay, first thing we'll do is we'll show the loading screen. So show loading screen. After we show the loading screen, we're then going to use one of our other Blueprint's online session nodes. We're going to right click and say join session. So join session. And it's asking for the player controller. Just get player controller is fine. Let's plug this in. And let's take our session to join, plug that in, like so. And because we are a listen server, we don't need to do anything on the success. We'll just automatically join it. But we do need to present what happens if we fail. So we'll take our dialog message here. I'm just going to copy this one, paste it, and plug it in on the failure. Change the text to say failed to join session. Please try again. Something like that. So that's joining a server. Just add a comment around this. See, and say join the server called from server menu. So let's compile and save. And let me double check my notes, see what else we need to do. We need to do error handling, and I guess we can finish off our load screen. So let's do our load screen. Just want to put this right there. So for our load screen, let's go ahead and create a widget. So create widget. We kind of done this already a bunch of times, so let's do loading screen. And we don't necessarily need to promote this to a variable either, so we're just going to get owning player. Connect that up, so. Or, excuse me, not get owning player, get player controller. Get player controller. Owning player you can use inside of a UMG widget. It's the same thing as get player controller. From here, we'll just add the viewport. Oh, you know what? We do need this to be a variable. We do need to promote this to a variable because we're going to need to tell it to go away once we get into game. Otherwise, it's going to stay up and be persistent. So let's, my bad, let's actually disconnect that real quick. Right click, promote to variable. Glad I thought of that. Let's say loading screen WB. Let's put that in the widgets. Like so. Let's hold control and drag that in. Just drag off of this is valid. Let's plug this in. We'll do it just like the other ones. There is a node that you can use. I think it's remove all widgets from display or something like that. We could use that as well. But if we don't want to remove all widgets and we want to remove just the loading screen, we'll need a reference to it. So that's why we're doing this. Okay, let's go ahead, copy this, paste it, add to viewport. Let's hook this up. Let's plug that in, just like the other ones. So add a comment around this, shows the loading screen when called. Okay, we're just about done. A couple more things that we'll do before we wrap this video. We need to handle network errors and travel errors. You could do that inside of the game instance blueprint. There's a couple events that you can call. So the first, over here to the right, I'm going to say, let's start out with our event network error. So event network error. So opportunity for Blueprints to handle network errors. Thank you. Event network error. It's asking for the failure type and is server. For the failure type, it's going to tell us what type of failure we had. We need to pass that through our macro to give us the appropriate message. So what we'll do is we'll create a couple functions to handle that. So let's create some functions. Create a function. We'll call this net error to string. And we'll create another function called travel error to string, just because we're going to need that in a little bit. So for the net error to string, let's add some inputs on it and outputs. So we'll add an input. First, the input is going to be the eNetwork failure. So eNetwork failure. And we'll call this failure type. Then we'll add an output, a string. And we'll call this the outString. And we're also going to make this pure. We don't need executable pins on this. We could just make it pure. And what we could do is, let's actually do the, did I do the travel error? Did I do that on travel error? I sure did, didn't I? Net error to string. I want to make sure I got the right ones. And then travel error. Oh, I'm looking at the travel error. That's why. I was like, why is it? My graph says travel error, but I was on the net error to string. I was like, I'm doing the wrong one. All right, so yeah, net error to string is good. Let's do the same thing for the travel error. Create an input. It's going to have an outString. And for this one, we can click this drop down now and say eTravel failure. So eTravel failure. And this is failure type. So just double checking eTravel for this one, and for this one, eNetwork. Okay, I'm not going to do each of these functions right now. I just wanted to create those so that we can call them here. For the travel error, let's also make sure that it is pure as well. So both of those should be pure, which they are. Okay, so we have our eNetwork error event, which gets called whenever there is a network error. What we can do now is drag off of this and say net error to string. So net error to string is going to call our function and spit out a string for us, which we can then pass through our macro and give us the correct string that we should be displaying. Now it's asking is server. We're going to hold B and left click to create a branch, plug in the condition, plug in this, and plug in this. You could come back and do a separate message for servers if it's the server, but we're going to leave this like this for now. Maybe we'll do that towards the end of this video series, but we can leave it like this for now. Okay, let's add a comment around this. Hit C and say handle network errors and display message. In fact, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to plug in the true here as well. So if it is the server, then it's going to spit out the same message. You could do a custom message for servers if you'd like. So I'm going to leave it like that. And let's go ahead and right-click event travel error now. So event travel error, similar to the network error here. Now we're going to call our travel error to string. So travel error to string. So let's take our display error message, copy and paste it, plug it in, plug that in. So this is handling travel errors. So add a comment around that. So handle travel errors and display message. So. And the last thing that we're going to do before we wrap this video, we need to create a custom event and use one more of our online session nodes. So let's create a custom event. Down below all of these, custom event. This custom event is going to be called the destroy session caller. And it's going to need an input. And the input is going to be of the player controller type. And it's going to be reference. So player controller reference, and we'll say player controller is fine. And now what we can do is right click and say destroy session. So destroy session is what we're looking for. So now we can connect this up, and we can connect that up. And we don't need to do anything else here. What we are essentially doing is whenever we leave, say we're in the lobby and we return to the main menu, we need to destroy that session that we were in so that we can join new sessions down the road. So we need to have a way to call that through script to destroy the session. So let's add a comment around this and say destroy session when called. All right, our game info instance blueprint is pretty much set up. We do need to come back into these functions later in our macro, but for the most part, it's set up. I think we're good here. Let's compile and save. And there's one last thing that we need to do. Let's go ahead and dock that up there for now. We need to make sure that we're in the main menu, and we need to go into the level blueprint of our main menu map. So let's go up here, open level blueprint. And we don't need the event tick. All we need is just the event begin play here. What we're going to do is call our show main menu event from our level blueprint. So we'll say get game instance. So get the game instance and cast to the game info instance, which is our instance. We can connect this up. So now we can drag off of this and say show main menu. So now it will show the main menu whenever we start up our game. So let's compile and close that and close this. And let's just save all of our work. Alrighty, we are done with the game info instance for now. So we're going to pause and we'll pick it back up in the next video where we start working on the player info structure, our save game. We'll create some thumbnails for our characters that we're going to be using. We'll do that in the next video. So we're going to pause and we'll pick it back up in a few. Thank you guys for watching.